който е и бивш работник в Олимекс. Дойде след студентските години, но не се задържа дълго. Явно му стана скучно с това, което правихме. Той ще говори как се билдва и как се кастомизира Android. А пък той знае много добре как се правят тези работи, защото фирмата, в която работи, прави дистрибуцията на Android, която е къстъм дистрибуция за Amazon. Тоест, ако някой от вас е имал Amazon Kindle, много е вероятно софтуера, който е ползвал, да е правен тук в София. И Митко е един от хората, които се занимават с това нещо, така че предполагам, че ще бъде интересна лекцията.
Thank you. So I'm Dimitar Dimitrov, and today I will present you the very first steps in customizing your Android phone. Now, I will not talk about installing applications, installing new launchers. Instead, I will talk about the low-level stuff, the platform-level customizations. So first, what is Android? I'm sure you all know what is Android. It is running on the majority of mobile handsets in today's world. It is probably, arguably, the Linux distribution with the biggest install base, running on billions of devices. At the core of the Android is the venerable Linux kernel. It is usually what you find in desktop Linux distributions, with a bit of patches from Google for additional drivers, and drivers for the system on a chip that your mobile phone uses. Unfortunately, at the current state of affairs is that most of the mobile chipsets are rather new, and very little of their drivers, very small set of those drivers is mainlined. So, the obvious difference between desktop regular Linux distributions and Android is that Android uses very little of the regular Linux user space you all know from desktop distributions. It uses custom hardware abstraction layers for most of the multimedia audio functionality. Also, the sensor hubs are different hardware abstraction layers. Then, on top of the hardware abstraction layers that every system-on-a-chip vendor writes for their own chipsets, sits the Android framework, which is common for all Android devices, which allows most applications to be installed on different mobile handsets. Now, what are the differences between desktop Linux distributions and Android? First and foremost, there is no package manager. In this regard, it's similar to Buildroot, where you build an image and it stays that way for the rest of the life of this software image. You cannot install additional platform features. Even more so, the system partitions that are the user equivalent in the desktop world are mounted read-only to avoid modification of the platform. There is no regular upgrade, or this is achieved in the mobile world with flashing completely new firmware images on top of the currently executed one. Also, the init subsystem is completely different. It is a custom written from Google for Android, and I don't think it will displace systemd or sysv anytime soon because it doesn't have so much functionality as the desktop versions. But anyway, this is the Android focus is on the mobile, where everything has to be super efficient, both for power and size and operating memory requirements. Also, the C library is completely different. It is written, I think, starting from NetBSD, but heavily modified by Google. It's not the GNU libc you all know about. It's not UC libc. Also, the default images on the mobile phones you have do not have the regular tools you would expect from desktop distributions. No bash, no secure shell, not even VI text editor. Before we dive into the details of the Android build system and customizations, a few words about where to look for resources, apart from the obvious Google search. First, sourceandroid.com is the ultimate starting point for any platform developer for Android. It contains many good getting started guides for various aspects of the platform development. At the second place is the source code. Yes, you all know, in the open source world, the source code is the ultimate documentation. There is also Android platform Google groups, where you cannot find much valuable information, but that's where the Google folks make announcements, and that's why you may want to look at them. Also, occasionally I have found valuable information in the XDA developers Android forums. These are the guys that make the Cyanogen Android fork. So let's see your typical phone in your pocket. Where does the firmware come from? First, oh, sorry. So first, there is the Android open source project. This is the mostly Apache licensed open source project that you can download, compile, and run on your own reference phones. Typically, the chipset vendors take that Android source project and add their own drivers for the chipsets. You remember the hardware abstraction layers? The chipset vendors implement those hardware abstraction layers for their chipsets. Also, the SoC vendors typically add some enhancements to the Android framework or the hardware abstraction layers. Then the OEM, the guys that manufacture the phone, also may add some enhancements like additional applications for their own mobile store, additional launchers, sensor hubs. Of course, then they have to license the Google mobile services so that you get Chrome, Gmail, YouTube applications from Google. The GMS is totally proprietary. It comes from Google only, and it's licensed only to if you manufacture a handset and you make an agreement with Google. And with all that combined, you get the typical firmware in your typical Android phone in your pocket. Now, most desktop and many embedded Linux distributions take the tar plus patches approach to packaging. You get the source tarball from the open source tool. They make some their own patches and write build rules to build them. That usually works for releasing. This is very convenient for releasing, but this may not be convenient for the wild horse race that is the mobile world. In the mobile world, you have to make a phone in the next 10 months and release it, otherwise it's out. So you need very fast write, test, build cycles. The Android approach is very convenient for the wild horse race. That is the mobile world. By taking let's keep everything in Git and let's check it out. So all the projects, all the source code is in Git repositories. Each project gets its own Git repository. That's why when you check out some project, you get the full history from the origin. You also get the history from made from Google for Android. How this is achieved? Well, there is this tool called Repo, written by Google, which takes care of managing the forest of Git trees. It's not strictly tied to Android, but is typically used in Android. This tool allows you to check out a forest of Git trees in different subdirectories. It allows you to iterate and for every Git project run some command. It allows you to synchronize the entire forest with the latest upstream versions in the master branches of Android. It has a lot of other functionality you can check out with repo help. Now, how does repo achieve that managing of Git forests? There is this XML text file called manifest that contains a list of all the projects included in Android. First, it has the remote name, that is the server you download your software from. There is this googlesource.com server that acts like a mirror to all the projects that are native to Android or forked from other places. Then there is a list of Git projects that are contained in Android 3. You see, you define a path where this project will be cloned. Well, you defined the name of the project, or otherwise where it is placed in the remote server. You also define the remote name and which revision. You can place a branch name or Git commit ID. Another very useful feature that we use almost every day is pinning, which means that you can create a manifest which contains the head commit ID of every project in your tree. This way you can create a snapshot of your Git forest and save it for a later time. You can use it to make daily builds. This way you can get back to a daily build from 10 days ago, check it out, build it, and test for regressions, for example. A few words about managing patches. Now, there is this tool called Gerrit, which is used for patch review. You know, the typical open source project in the Linux world use mailing lists. This may be fine for single project, but when you have hundreds, it might not scale well. So Google wrote, I think Google wrote this Gerrit tool where you push your patches to a special Git remote, and they appear on a web interface. All the patch review is done via web. It's tightly integrated with Git. It's basically a web interface to Git. You can check the diff, the text diff of the patch. You can submit patches. You can reject patches. You can place commands. it's not strictly tied to Android. In fact, many open source projects started using Gerrit for their own means, like OpenOCD. So you may want to explore this if you start your open source project. Now, let's get to the details. Let's see how to download and build this Android open source project. We will build the images for Nexus 5 phone. First, we download the repo tool. Actually, the repo tool has two parts. First is a thin shell wrapper that you download from the web, and then you call repo init, giving the manifest Git project as an argument. So repo init will download the proper manifest. It will also download the repo internals from the internet, and it will initialize the repo. You can specify a release tag instead of the master branch, but typically in the Android world, at least in the open Android world, the master branch is where all the action happens. I think you can make patches and push for review from the master branch. Then you call repo sync to fetch all the Git projects and check them out. Now that is one drawback for keeping everything in Git. The download data is massive, like tens of gigabytes for the current Android master. At a previous slide, I pointed that some of the vendors, the chipset vendors, provide some drivers and hardware abstraction layers. What I did not tell you is that some of those drivers are proprietary and some are open source. The proprietary ones, unfortunately, may never go open source, like the 3D graphics accelerator libraries, some sensor stuff, some audio acceleration also. That's why if you want a functional Android image, you have to get those proprietary blobs from somewhere. For development boards, when you start your next big thing, you typically go to your vendor, chipset vendor, and ask him, hey, give me the proprietary blobs. For Nexus reference devices, you go to Google. Google has provided all the Nexus phones proprietary images. You can download them, untar to your repo tree, and then you can make a functional Android image. A few words about the Android build system. Up until Marshmallow, Android is being built with non-recursive GNU-make. Basically, think of this like one giant makefile with lots of includes. This means that every build rule you write for various modules in Android gets included in this one giant makefile. You have to keep that in mind because even though build rules are scattered in small makefile fragments, once you define a variable in one of those fragments, it will be alive and it will be visible in all other makefile fragments. But that should not scare you actually, because the makefile fragments for typical projects are very easy. Very easy because Google has written very helpful macros, GNU make macros for defining the build rules. So here is one example. First, you have to, for every makefile fragment, you need to define the local path. That's because you have non-recursive make where every makefile is included. So inside the makefile fragment, you don't know what is the current directory. So you have to explicitly set it. Then you define the local source files where the source files you're compiling, any dependencies. You also set the local module name, which will be the name of the, in this example, of the executable. And then you include a makefile fragment which will parse all the local variables and generate the rules for building this project. Why there is clear vars macro at the beginning? Because the next Android makefile fragments should not see the local variables from the previous fragment. That's why this clear vars macro goes and clears all the variables with local prefix. That's why this is the way. That's how there is no contamination between makefile fragments. A few words about the new build system. In the new Android master branch, there is this new build system developed by Google. It's brand new. It's called Song. It uses new technology to speed up the compilation process. And for the Star Trek fans, Mr. Song is the scientist who made the data, the artificial life form. So it's a good play of words. Now, compatibility with GNU make fragments is not lost because there is this CATI tool for parsing and integrating the old GNU make fragments. Here is an example of the new build system. Basically the same idea with the promise that you can augment with Go snippets and more easily write custom rules. Before we start compiling, a few words about build flavors. In the Android world, on the phones you get, they are typically user builds. User means production images. They're restricted, they have limited access because you don't want someone else to plug the USB and get all your data from the phone. Then there is the user debug images, which are more suited for platform development. They enable debugging by default and other features used by platform developers. There is also the engineering image, which contains even more debugging tools and debug configurations, which slow things a little bit. So I have not seen engineering builds being used that often. Now about the Linux kernel. Interestingly, it's funny that the AOSP default master branch includes only pre-built VM Linux images. Of course, the source code is available, but the designers decided that they will include only pre-built images in the Android trees. Typically, people just include the source code for their custom boards in the tree and write custom makefile fragments to compile it as part of the larger Android build. And I have pointed one example from the Qualcomm trees, where you can see an example of makefile fragment for compiling the Linux kernel. People also do this for the bootloaders because they want, with one make, to generate all the images, including the bootloaders. The kernel arguments, you know that typically they are given by the bootloader, but there is also provision in the Android build system where you can add additional command line arguments to the kernel in the device makefile fragment. Now, so we're starting with the practical stuff right now. First, we have to initialize the environment of the Android 3.3 by sourcing a helpful shell script, which will define a couple of macros and will set the environment right. Next, we use the launch command that we got from the above shell script to select which phone we are building for and which build flavor we want. I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but typically the marketing name, for example, Nexus 5, is chosen much later in the device, in the product life. When engineers start developing a product, they typically choose a code name. For Nexus 5, this is Hammerhead. For other devices, you can check the sourceandroid.com website to check what are the code names for other Nexus devices. So we select the AOSP Hammerhead user debug configuration and just type make to build it. What do we get from the build when we issued make and it's completed successfully? First is the boot image. It behaves very much like the typical RAM disk of the desktop distributions. It has a RAM disk with the root file system, it has the VM Linux kernel, and it has a small section in this file with the kernel command line. That's why you needed to set that kernel command line argument in the device makefile fragment. Here, the root file system from the RAM disk is mounted as read-only, as root. You also get the recovery image, which is very much like boot, but used for factory reset and over-the-air updates. You also get the system image where the bulk of the Android user space resides. It's also mounted as read-only. You get the vendor image for some phones. For the Hammerhead, it's too old and everything goes in system, but newer phones have split the proprietary blobs and pushed them into the vendor image, into a separate partition. You also get the user data, which is essentially a blank partition where the user stuff will go on, like installed applications, device settings. How do we flash the images? Actually, you can use anything you like. But for the past few years, Fastboot emerged as the industry standard for flashing Android images. It's a tool that is included in the Android open source project. It's also packaged in Debian and other distributions. U-boot and little kernel bootloaders support it. So you can use a PC with this Fastboot tool and USB connection to your phone to flash images. Typically, you have to unlock your device in order to allow flashing, you have to check with your manufacturer, with your mobile vendor how to do this. But for Nexus devices, it's a simple fast boot flashing unlock. And then we just need to call fastboot with the partition name and the partition image, and it will flash the images. Of course, we reboot into the Android space, and your device should boot. Once booted, you can communicate with your device via USB with another tool called ADB. It stands for Android Debug Bridge. The ADB allows you easy access to the phone file system with push and pull operations. It can give you a shell where you can execute commands. And it's the primary developer's tool for getting walks, installing applications. So let's give an example of Android customization, which will be adding SSH server to a phone. Actually, I know people who have done that in order to synchronize their calendar and settings without using Google services. So, as I told you previously, there is no package manager, so we have to include the SSH server in Android build system. There are some workarounds if you wish. Of course, you can compile static executables and push them to Android, but the proper way to do this is to integrate the SSH server into the Android build system. Of course, we will have to write our own makefile fragment to do this. Fortunately, someone has already done so. So all we have to do now is to add the OpenSSH tree containing the Android MK fragment into our tree. How do we do this? We simply edit our manifest file at the remote server where we know there is a OpenSSH tree. We add the OpenSSH project, citing the myremote, which we defined previously. Here I have used git commit as a revision, because I want to know what exactly I'm getting. I don't want to rely on the master branch, because master may change at some point and might break my build. So we call reposync to read the new manifest file and fetch my OpenSSH project. There are some shortcuts. Instead of making a full image build, we can build only parts of only certain projects with the command you got from the environment setup. We can also call the target directly. Okay. So here are the makefile fragments for SSH server. And I want to talk about the init subsystem. 2 minutes. The init subsystem contains a few text files where you define your services. Here I have shown how to edit the initrc text file service, define the SSHAD service, and some initialization commands. You can actually define triggers and the sequence in which the service will start. This will not work, of course, because we have the ST-Linux part of the Android. ST-Linux will reject any unknown commands and daemons you define, so we need to define some ST-Linux containment, some ST-Linux definitions in order to allow SSHD to run. And now, finally, SSHD will work. And just 30 seconds to explain why you need to customize Android. First, you may want to run Android on a very peculiar device. We've had that at MM Solutions with the Barnes & Noble Nook Touch, where it had e-ink display instead of regular LCD. We have also worked on Project Ara, where it's completely different from current phones, where with static hardware. We also may need to deviate from the chipset vendor reference device. Or you may want to fork Android and work around some limitations. That's what the Amazon and Barnes & Noble did with their Android forks. Or you merely need to upgrade to the latest Android version without much support from Android chipset vendors. So, do you have any questions? It is viable. It is viable. You merely need to strip the user interface, perhaps, and it will work. Actually, I might say it's pretty spot on to use Android because it's optimized for low resource devices. And most of the chipset vendors provide Android support. So it makes sense.
You also have experience with provisioning a multitude of devices at the same time.
What do you mean by provisioning?
Well, for instance, some use cases where you have a multitude of devices that have to be set up, configured remotely, and instead of doing it manually on the device.
Yes, but this is another kind of customization. Because for platform customizations, you need to provide new firmware images. And what you're talking about, I think it's called device administration. This is a feature of recent Android versions where you can allow an outside administrator to remotely access and configure your system. Its primary use is for corporate users. Recent versions do support this, but I will not call it a platform feature.